Alright, so in the last video we actually did configure the Firebase functions, but if you're just joining in on this video, you're going to want to add first off, you're going to need the Firebase tools, which you do with npm install -g Firebase tools. But after you log in with Firebase, you can run Firebase init functions. Again, my app already has this, so you can see it already, or it should already have it essentially, but I'll just choose JavaScript again and no to ESLint, and it already exists. You want to overwrite it. I'm just going to say no because it's basically the same thing. So you should already have it if you've been following along, but if not, you can add in the Firebase functions. You're going to have this functions folder up here back in your code, and that is going to have an index.js file. So this file here we're going to be able to use to create a Firebase cloud function, and that cloud function is going to be responsible for sending an email to us actually. So again, this is all going to be for this contact us form. So if someone enters their email address and a message, we want that email to be sent to us. So there are other ways to do this, like you could just save it to Firestore, and then you could just go look in the database at what the message was. But it's definitely nicer to have that message be emailed to you. And this functionality, setting this up, leaves for a lot of potential to, if you wanted to, send an email also to the user. So we're not going to be covering that part, but you could easily modify this to do that. All right, so there is one other package we're going to need, and we're actually going to be installing this within the functions directory. So you'll notice that the functions directory actually has its own packages, or its own package.json. So this is actually separate from the package.json file that the Vue app itself has. So this functions directory, which is specifically related to the cloud functions for Firebase, has its own set of dependencies. So make sure that you change to the functions directory by changing directory cd into functions. And then from in here, you're going to want to install the node mailer package. So you're going to use npm, and that should get installed, and you should see that these two files get updated. If these two files didn't get updated, and you'll only notice this if you have this checked into get, then that means you did it wrong. You don't want your base package.json and the JSON lock getting updated there. So we can go ahead and delete all. This kind of gives you an example of how you can create a new function, but we're going to just delete this and create our own. All right, so we're going to need two new required fields here. So we already had functions by default. Admin is going to allow us to access Firebase admin, which is going to be necessary for actually creating the cloud function. And then the node mailer is going to allow us to actually send the email from that cloud function. This line here is going to initialize the admin for the app. So that's basically all the setup we'll need. Now we're going to need to create a transporter or actually just a transport is what it's called, for node mailer. So let me bring up the docs right here. This is the node mailer docs. A transport is essentially what is going to be used to send the email. Our Node app or our Vue app or any JavaScript app by itself is not going to be capable of sending an email. So we're going to need some other provider to send the email. So I'm going to be using SendGrid in this example and showing you that, but really the core of it is it's going to be set up with a single connection. So we're going to be setting this up right here. And all this is really doing is saying what should we use to send the email with? So what provider should we use to send the email with? So we can actually just copy this. And again, that's going to be SendGrid for this case. We're going to set this equal to a variable first off. So let's do that and say let transporter equal this node mailer. We can delete this. These examples here are going to need to be filled in with our actual information from SendGrid. So let me actually bring you into the SendGrid console and I'll show you what that's like. This is my SendGrid account that I created for this project specifically. What you're going to do is first off just go over to SendGrid and create an account, and I'll link down below the link to SendGrid and all of that, you're going to go to settings here and you're going to go to API keys. Now this would be my live key, but I'm going to create, for this example, I'm just going to create a new key that I can use, and using this new key will allow me to use it in this tutorial and not have to worry about blurring it out. You're going to want to give this full access, and then you can hit create in Vue. So now you'll be able to see the key here, and they're only going to show it to you once. So you're going to copy that, and that is actually going to become the password. So that's going to be the password of your account. And because we're using SMTP and this simple setup for all of this, you can use, you're gonna need to change the host to be smtp.sendgrid.net. The port will stay the same, false will stay the same, and then the user is actually going to be API key. And now you should be configured to send emails through SendGrid. So I'll hit done on this. And now we need to actually create our Firebase Cloud function. So that's pretty simple to do too. You call export here, or exports actually, and then you name your function. So whatever you want to name the function is what you're going to call it here. So send email is what I'm going to call it, and this is just going to equal a new functions request. So that's going to look like this. So we're going to have when we deploy this, we'll have a new Firebase function that's called send email. So now we need to actually get this to send the email to ourselves. First, we're going to set the email from address. So essentially how this is going to work is we're going in our home view, we're going to be setting the email from and the message and passing it into this function. But for now, let's just set the email from being, we're going to just hard code these values, and then we're going to come back and update that to actually work in the app. So for the email from, let's just use that dave1@test.com, and then we're also going to need a message here. All right, and now we want to set actually the mail options, and those mail options are what's going to be used and passed to the transporters. These are essentially, it's just going to be the to, from, and the subject and content of the mail, or of the email. So we'll start with from, and the from is going to be this email from. The from actually is not going to be from this email from. The from is going to be from our SendGrid user account. So in SendGrid, because again, the way that we're setting up this email is that this is going to be an email that's sent to us, essentially from us as well. So if you go into your email and you go and look at the settings, you're going to need to go into the sender authentication. So really you wouldn't want to do this with a Gmail account, but that's what I have it set up right now with. You're going to need to verify your single sender verification, or really ideally is your domain authentication, but I haven't done that yet, and you don't need to do that at this point in the app either, but you are going to need a verified domain here. So the from is going to be this address here, and this is important because if the email doesn't come from this address, then SendGrid is going to block it, because SendGrid is not going to allow you to send from non-verified accounts. Hopefully that makes sense. So anyway, the from address is going to be, actually, in this case, the from address is going to be my one-man startup email. And this needs to be a string. The way you can also set these up is with emails, you can set the name to display. So it'll look like it comes from Travel Treasury, but the email address that's used is actually going to be that. Okay, that works. And then the to is going to be, I'm actually just going to send it to this email address as well. I'm going to send it to this email account, but this would be where you actually want these contact emails to go. So this is where you'll receive them. Then the subject will be Travel Treasury contact form submission. And the HTML is going to be, this will be like the body of the email itself. We can use this backtick to do string interpolation in JavaScript. So then you can use $, and we'll say the message. So it'll be this value here for message. And then we're going to do actually a break. We're going to do 2 breaks. So it's like enter essentially. And then we're going to say from, and we'll put the email from there. So the email from will actually just be in the body of the message. And this is important because we're going to want to know who to respond to. When the email comes into my inbox, it's going to go into my onemansstartup@gmail.com inbox, and it's going to come from essentially that same email. And then it's going to have the message and the actual senders from email there. So when I respond, I'll know the response needs to go to this email. Now we need to actually set this mail options to send through this transporter. So to do that, we call this transporter variable here, and we're going to call send mail on it. And then we're going to pass it the mail options. And the second parameter are options with error and info. And really this doesn't mean the email sending. Like the email will send here. And this is similar to what we were doing before with like the catch block. This is kind of what's in here is kind of like the catch block. So if there's an error, and you'll see this in a second, we can essentially, let's just log it and we'll respond with the error. So that's all this is doing. So we're going to log to our console that there was an error, and we'll have the error message. And then we're going to do this response.send is not actually going to send the email, because the email will not get sent if we're in this part here. The way that these cloud functions work, this is important to note, the way these cloud functions work is it is just an HTTP request. So this is going to send a request, and that request is going to need to give a response back. So the request is going to come into the send email function. It's going to perform all this stuff, and this send email function is expected to give a response. So that's what this response is here. So we're just going to send that error as a string to the response. I mean, there's no real value in sending the error as a string right now, but that's what we'll do for now. You could set in some other logic later that will catch those errors and actually do different things on the user's end and show the different stuff if it didn't work, but we're not really going to worry about that in this video. If there was no error, then the response is just going to be that the message was sent successfully. Again, this is not something that we're actually going to be showing the user, but this is something that this cloud function needs to have. It needs to have a response. At this point, the function is actually set up to send the email. So really what we want to do is deploy it. So we're going to save this file, and then we're going to go back into our terminal here. And within this function's directory still, we're just going to run Firebase deploy. And this isn't going to deploy our app, but it is going to deploy our cloud function. So if you read kind of what's going through here, it's preparing the functions directory, and then it's packaging the functions directory. And it'll take a little bit, but once it is deployed, if we go back into our Firebase here and we go to functions, you're going to see we have a new function here called send email, which is the one we just deployed. If you went into this before that, there would have been nothing here. You'll see there's this node 8 is depreciated. We could fix that real quick actually by going into the packages JSON and change this from node 8 to node 12 and just save that. And then the function is still actually being deployed. So give this a second and then just deploy it again. Okay, when I try to deploy that again, you see I get this error note that it needs either node 8 or node 10. So this was a typo. It should be node 10, not 12. And then go ahead and deploy that again. That will just get that'll get us on the newer version of Node, which is going to be depreciated eventually. So it's a good idea to do that. All right, so that's complete now. We can go back into the Firebase console and reload the page, and you'll see where that error is gone. So here's the thing with these cloud functions. They're actually they are, as I was saying, just HTTP requests. So you'll see this is the trigger right here. So if we go and copy this into a new tab, it's actually going to run the function for us. So you'll see we get that message back here that says your message was submitted successfully, which again is just what we're responding with when we call the function. So if everything worked right, I should have received an email. So let me pull up my email, and I did. So this is, I have a filter on right now that's basically just going to filter for these emails, but you'll see this is expected because of the way that we have our SendGrid configuration set up. Basically what this warning here is saying is an email was sent from my email address that didn't come from Google. And since this is a Gmail account, it's marking it suspicious because it is actually not the way that a Gmail email would normally come in. But that's fine. You could ignore that. So yeah, we get the message and we get that email address that we had there. So now now that we have this working, we actually need to set up our form that is on this page to send two values. And when that send email or when that send message button is clicked, it'll trigger this function. The first step to that actually is let's modify our function first. So now that you understand that this is working with a function like this, we're going to send parameters to this. So there's parameters that can be passed into this function that we can use essentially to get these values here. To access those values within this function, it's pretty simple actually. We don't need, instead of hard coding that, we can use the request here. And we can call query, and then we can call whatever we want to name that parameter. So we haven't really created the parameter yet, but we're going to call it email from. And then we're going to do very much the same thing. And we're going to just do message. And that looks good. Now this we're going to save, and everything should be fine here. We are going to need to redeploy this, so we can do that right now while we work on the next part. So redeploy that, and that's basically just going to update this function to use the request parameters. So now we can update our home page view to have the form actually link to that Firebase cloud function. So the first step here, and this is similar to how we set up the other form, is we're going to need to create a new object here, which is going to be the contact email and the contact message. And these are both going to be just blank strings to begin with. And similar to how we had that message here, we're going to do another one with, we're going to do a contact message as well. This one we'll call it notice. So now that we have these variables, we can bind them to our contact form. I'm going to minimize that form. So now we have this form we set up earlier, but there are two inputs. Well, there's the input and the text area. So the input for the email, we're going to use that contact email. So we're going to use vmodel here again. And this is going to be contact email. And then similarly for the text area, the order of this doesn't matter, but I do like to put the view binded object as the first element in it. I think it makes it easier to find. And this will be the contact message with the underscore there. So those are set up. Similarly, how we set our last form with a function, we're going to do that as well here. And this one will be, we'll call it send contact message. So this one you'll notice we're not going to pass these in because I'm going to show you another way. Really in the first one where we were passing the email in, you don't need to do it that way. These will be accessible in the JavaScript code because they're part of the data. So we only actually are going to show this form if the user didn't just submit it. So basically once the user submits this form, we want to hide the form and it'll just have a message instead. So let's set that up first, and then we're going to create this send contact message. So we can use this, we're going to add another parameter here, and we're going to call it show contact. and that will equal, it's actually gonna equal true to begin with. And this will just be either true or false. So we want that to be true when you first load the page, and then we're gonna set it to false once this form is submitted. This other cool thing you can do in Vue is bind those variables to a div and use vif and velse. We already have a div, which is our div right here. And we can actually put a vif on that. And we're going to say if show contact equals true, which it will when we first load the page, then we're going to be showing essentially all of this. And after this div is over, we can do an else. So we can do a new div, and this will be, we don't need a class on it. We can just do velse. And here we can just put, we're going to put these 2 lines that the message was sent successfully and pretty much a thank you. So if you go back here and reload it, we're actually probably, okay, there's no error, so that was good. So that's when it's true. If we were to change this to false and reload, you'll see this is what it'll look like. This is what we want it to look like once the form is submit. So that's good. Set that back to true, and we will be updating that value, this value, after the form is submit. So another thing we want to do real quick in terms of the view is if there is a notice, so again, this contact notice, we're going to set any errors in the form to this contact notice field. So this is very similar to what we were doing with the message when we had the user's email, signing the user up with their email. And we just want to show that error if there is an error. This one is, we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to use another vif. So this class we're going to call alert. And this is a bootstrap class alert and an alert warning. And that'll just make it yellow. We're going to use a vif though here. And we're going to be saying if the show contact, or sorry, this one is not the show contact. This one is going to be if we have a contact notice. So if we have a contact notice, basically, so if our contact notice is not equal to an empty string, then we're going to display this message. And the message is going to be a little bit more in depth. So it's going to be, we're going to first say that there was a problem, and then we're going to actually say whatever the notice value is set to. So the notice value is just going to be set to whatever that problem is. So we could save that. You go back here and refresh, everything is fine. If you go in and just as an example, set this to some error, you can see the errors there. Our alert isn't actually working the way I would expect. So let me see. I spelled alert wrong here. So now you can see we have our yellow alert warning. So that looks good. So this is really going to happen when our email address is not valid, which we'll get to in a second. But for now, we can set that back to nothing. Now it's time to actually set up this function, this send contact message function. So when the form is actually filled out, it's going to send to this function, and that's where we're going to call that Firebase Cloud function. So the view is now set up. We can set this up in our methods here. We can create a new method. It looks like I'm missing an E at the end of this contact message, so update that. And again, this method takes no parameters, so that's all that is. Now, if we want to do some validation on that email, that's something we are going to want to check before we send our cloud, before we make our call to Cloud Firestore. We're actually going to do that with another function, and this is such a simple function. I'm just going to copy the whole thing and paste it here. And this is something I obviously just found online. This will validate our email and just make sure the format of it matches a typical email format. So this is, and that'll be on GitHub if you can go and copy it as well. So we're going to check that the email is valid first. If the email is not valid, then we're going to set that alert, that contact notice, to equal that the email is not valid. So let's do that very first. So if we can make this call to the validation email, And the email here is actually going to be this contact email. So this is where it's a little different. We're not passing it in as a parameter, but we can call it with this and contact email, because this in the context of this function is going to be the home view page, and contact email is going to be found within the data of the home view page. So anyway, calling this, and this is basically going to be returning the test here. So it'll be either true or false. So if it's not, and actually we're going to need a this in front of calling that function as well, because this is also part of the homepage view. Basically, this will return true if the email is valid. So if the email is not valid, that would mean that we want to show that message. So using this exclamation point here is basically going to say what that will convert this to being is if this value is not true. So that means if it's false, which means that the email is not valid, then we want to set this dot contact notice, and we're going to set that equal to the email address was badly formatted. All right, so actually if we save this, we can test it right now. If you go and you just hit send message, the email address is badly formatted, so it will pop up with this message. If you were to refresh the page, but then actually put in an email address and hit send, you'll notice the message does not pop up, but nothing happens. So that's expected at this point of the app. The next thing that we're going to do is check that the message is actually at least 10 characters long. So to do that, we can do an else if here, and we can say this dot the contact message, because again, that is going to be the contact message is what's bound to this text area. So if that value is I lost my place. Let's see, right here. So if the contact message if its length is less than 10 characters, and you can choose however long you want these messages to be. I don't think anyone should be sending a contact message that's less than 10 characters. So 10 characters, I think, is a good one. Then we're going to set, similarly, we're going to set this contact notice equal to your message is too short. And both of these are just kind of measures to try and prevent being spammed. But that's really all it is. So you can go through and come up with more validations essentially and put them all in this type of format here. But once you pass all your validations, and make sure if you do it this way, you're using if, else if, because then it will run through, it'll just run through one. Like, it'll only ever give one error. So for instance, if we go in here right now and we hit submit, we're not getting both of those errors because it's hitting the first error and then it's just going to display that error. If I put my email in and then send it, now it'll give me that other error for the message being too short. So then if the message was fine and the email was fine, we can hit this last block, which is going to be our else. And this is where we're actually going to send that email. So we're going to call the Firebase function. And we can do that with, we're going to set this variable called the URL. And this, we're going to use the backtick quotes so that we can do string interpolation. But we're going to, at this point, let's actually check that our new changes were deployed. So again, those new changes being that we're going to accept parameters. So remember, we're going to have a parameter email from and message. So let's test that real quick. In the URL that we were in before, if you do a question mark, that's where you can start adding parameters. So then you're going to do email from equals, and this one will do test 2@gmail.com, and then the second parameter, you're going to use an @ and then the parameter name for that was message. So put the message there and put equals, and we could do test, so 3 tests, and then hit enter there. You'll see it does also say that it was submitted successfully. So let's go check our inbox again, and you'll see we did get a new email, and this one did come back with the parameters that we put into that URL. So that's good. That is what we expected and what we wanted. So now we can copy, essentially we're going to be copying this URL. So copy this URL here and set that equal to, back in the home view, set that equal to the URL here. And you'll notice that the cloud function is there, so send email. The email from here, you're going to want to highlight all of that and put a $, open close bracket, and that's where we can use this contact email. And the message is very similarly, you can do a $, and do this message or contact message. All right, so now this URL is formatted for the cloud function. So we need to actually make a post request to send that URL. That can be done with fetch, which is actually built in to Vue already. So first let's set some request options, and these will be a constant, we'll call request options. And this is just going to take two different parameters. One is the method, and that will be get. Another one is header, or headers, sorry. And this is really all that we want this to be, is the content type of JSON. So I'll just paste that in there. And that is good. Put a semicolon at the end of this, and then we can call fetch here. And we're going to fetch this URL. And we're going to pass in these request options. And that's it for that. And then once we make this call here, we're going to, if you remember how we set up that show contact being true, we're going to actually change that to be false. So that can be false, and it will hide the contact form and show that message that we put right here. All right, so I think everything should be set up to be sending an email. So we can actually X out of this and go back into our app. And this again is just running in our development mode. So I'll type in a third email. So we'll start with this one, could be test55@test.com, and then the message will be, does this work from the contact form? And if we hit send message here, it looks good so far. That was hidden. And let's check our inbox. And I just refresh it, and you'll notice it is coming from me, and that is because obviously the email address was set up as being the same thing. But yeah, it worked. I mean, there's the email from the contact form, and then if I want to reply to it, I mean, the email that was entered is right there as well. So yeah, that is basically that gets the contact page set up, so that's looking good. And now our landing page is essentially done. The only thing that's left to do is deploy it. And it was actually just one part of the entire series of building a landing page with Firebase and sending emails. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. All right, ciao for now.